Hello and welcome to episode 14 of Fun with Robotics. Well, if you've watched any of my previous videos, you've surmised that I like to build mobile carts for both the tools and the materials that I use on my projects. And this has worked out really well due to limited space in my shop. I can shuffle around the carts to make space, a larger space, for new projects that I'm working on. So that's really why I've stuck with this paradigm. So it won't come with any surprise that this week I'll be talking about two new carts that I've built. One is for my two metal chop saws, and the other is for my wood miter saw. So let's go have a look at these two new carts, and I'll talk about some of the design flaws in the first one and how I changed that design in the second. Let's go have a look. These are the two new carts that I built. This one on my left is for my two metal chop saws, and obviously this one on the right is for the wood miter saw. I'm going to talk about this one first because there are a few issues with it that I really found that I don't like after having used it for a while that I ended up correcting when I built this one. So the idea for this cart was to have a place where both saws could sit and be moved around to different work areas and be able to choose whichever saw is more appropriate for the job you're working on to make the cuts. So it's set up so that the level surface of the saw here, and all of the platforms in between and on the end, as well as the leaf on the end when it swings up, is all at the same level. So you can put a piece of work down here and slide it back and forth and choose whichever saw you want to cut that piece of material. Now the way that this is set up is all of the platforms, both the ones that the saw sits on and the ones in the middle and on the end, are suspended with threaded rod, and it allows me to then dial in very precisely the level of these platforms with respect to the platform of the saw itself. So with those threaded rods, you can really adjust it very, very accurately to whatever you need to make sure that it's perfectly level all the way across. That sounds great in theory, and it does work pretty well because I've used these saws to cut a lot of material, and it has served me fairly well. The thing is that once it's in place, once you've dialed it in, they don't move much at all. There's really no need to change it once it's all dialed in. The other purpose of having these threaded rods being adjustable, as well as these platforms that the saw sits on, was to be able to adjust it such that the platform of the saw is exactly the same height as my welding table. And the reason for that was, if you're cutting a long piece of tubing, let's say, on a 45-degree angle, you have your workpiece actually shooting out sort of like this. Here, let me kind of show you. So, for example, if this is a piece of tubing, maybe it's twice as long as this, and you want to cut it at a 45-degree angle, you're basically going to be laying it out like that. And so there's really no support here. And even if I had a leaf here to support it, it wouldn't do me much good. I really need something out here to support it. Now I could use one of those rollers or some sort of outfeed table, but I kind of have that already. I have my welding table. So the idea was to adjust these to be exactly the same height as my welding table, which is what I did. Again though, once it's all dialed in, it really doesn't move that much. So, oh, and dialing it in can be a rather painstaking process. You would think it would be a little easy, you just undo the bolts, adjust the height a little bit, and tighten them back up. But it's not quite that easy. Even the process of tightening back the bolts changes the height, and so you've got to like overcompensate because it's going to come down and squash the washers and the wood. So it's not as easy as you might think to get it dialed just to the right height. So the issue with this was, why not just make these at the right height to begin with and not worry about dialing in all the different heights. So that's the approach I did over here on this cart. The other issue with this cart was that I really didn't like the way I had built the leaf on the end here. You can see that it's really just a piece of 1/2 inch plywood, and there's hinges here that this leaf hangs off of. So it's really just cantilevering over there and hanging. And I thought, over time, this thing hanging, that wood is going to take a bend, and it's really going to be worthless at that point. So I stuck a couple of pieces of wood here just to hold it up a little closer to the end, and that seems to have worked. I mean, I don't think it's really got much of a bend to it at this point, but it's just not a good design. I mean, it's really kind of sloppy. And I did it that way because I really just needed to get something done at the time, which is fine. I mean, obviously you can't build the Taj Mahal every time you build something. Sometimes you just got to get it done. So that's what I ended up with. And again, I didn't like it, so over here I corrected that. I did something different on this cart. So let me just bring the camera in. I'll give you a quick look at how this is set up, and then we'll talk about the other one and the changes that I made, which I think are really an improvement. This is the other thing that I really don't like about this cart design. So we've got this platform, and it's the same height as the platform of the saw, but it cantilevers out almost a good 8 or 9 inches, and there's really nothing supporting it out here except for these blocks of wood that I cut and stuck in there. Now I'm looking at that, and it actually does have a slight little bend down. Really not too bad. I suppose I could live with that, but this end support here basically is just screwed here with 2 hinges, and it pops up and becomes flat with the surface. And all I do is I put one of these supports in there. Let's see, this is a single support. Let's try this. So there, that goes in there like that, and it makes it nice and level. I mean, it's really almost perfectly level. But again, the fact that this thing just hangs there and it kind of flops around, it's just not a good design. It's kind of sloppy thinking. I threw it together really quickly, and yes, it works, but I'm not all that happy with it. I just think I could do a lot better. Before we move on to the other cart for the miter saw, I thought I'd quickly go handheld and just give you a look at the construction of the cart itself. It's a fairly simple build. It's really just 2 rectangles made out of 2x4s that are connected with 2x4s, and then there's plywood on the top, the bottom, and 3 sides. So I'm just going to walk in here, just give you a real quick look inside. Nothing but 4 2x4s on the vertical, and then the rectangles on the top and the bottom, and that's it. And then there's just chipboard on the three sides. Actually, that's plywood there. This one's all plywood. And there's chipboard on the bottom. And then there's 3/4 inch plywood on the top. Let's talk about this second cart. The frame of the cart is very similar. It's built the same way. It's got two rectangular frames on the bottom and the top. And then there's 4 2x4s that connect the two at each corner. There are some differences, however. This one is a little bit shorter, and this top frame actually cantilevers out about 10 inches. And the reason for that was simply the width of the saw. I wanted it to be able to be close to the front so that I could manipulate these controls, and yet I needed room in the back for the saw to kind of hang out because of its design. This top piece slides back and forth. So, I'll bring in the camera in a bit. You can see how that actually protrudes out the back. But it is a little bit wider. Oh, and the other thing was that when I built this one originally, I had an outfeed table built onto the back of it. And that was really sort of to act as a double duty for my table saw. But since then, I've changed my table saw and I really don't need the outfeed table. So I took that off, but it still left this cart a little bit wider. Now the difference between this cart and this one was I got rid of the threaded rods to hold these side wings, and I just went with 2x4 frames that make it exactly even with the top of the saw. So I've got about a foot on each side, and generally that works 99% of the time. I really don't need to bring up these extra wings. But when I do, I've got wings on both sides now, and I can flip them up. So let me flip one of them up so you can see how it works, and then I'll talk about how it's actually hinged here. So I have this bungee cord, just a couple of hooks here, that just kind of hold these wings steady against the side of the cart. Now the nice thing about this redesign here is that when it drops down, I've recessed the hinges here so that this sits flush against the side of the cart. There's no movement there. If I push on it, it's just pushing against the cart. So this little bungee cord really just keeps everything nice and tight when I'm moving it around, and there's no bouncing around when I'm moving this thing. It just stays nice and tight against the edge here. So to put this up in place, all I do is take one of these boards here, this is right, and just fit it in here like so. So that's the bottom. And there you have it. And it's perfectly level with that prop leg underneath there. And so it works the same on the other side. But the power miter saw is probably the worst offender in terms of spewing sawdust all over the place. I mean, I probably spend more time cleaning up after using this saw than actually using the saw, because it just throws dust everywhere. Even with this bag that it has on the collection nozzle. So I will be adding a vacuum and a hose to this, and I'm hoping that will cut down the dust, the sawdust, by hopefully 60–70%. Then I added this hood around it, so that should contain the dust that gets spewed out. At least it won't be all over the floor, and then I can just vacuum up whatever collects in here. Now I did notice that when I'm using the saw, this box sort of fills up with a lot of sawdust, and eventually when it settles, some of it comes out the side and lays here and gets on the floor. But let me tell you, it's much, much better than it was without this dust hood on it. Over here, I have a removable panel so that when I tilt the saw for bevel cuts, it passes this. So let me get my screw. There's really only just one screw that holds this. I'll get my impact driver, I'll remove that screw, and I'll show you how that works. Remove that. And then this just sort of slides out. And then the saw can tilt and then can be slid out. And it just misses, the motor just misses this here. So that's the reason for that removable panel. And then move back up, lock it in place, and then I can put this back. Done. And then put the screw back in. And I'm done. Now, as far as the tilt is concerned, because the back of the saw actually extends beyond the back of the dust hood, I've got a hole cut in there sort of at an arc so that it can swing. So let me bring the camera in, I'll show you that. And then we'll go around the back side and show you how I prevent dust from spewing out the back. Hopefully you can see that hole back here. Let me take the bag off. That should make it a little easier to see. And so basically this saw, the back of it just rides within that channel. Like that. You lock it down. And then on the back, what I've done was just put a piece of tarp, the kind of tarp that you put over a boat or a car, and then I've put some wood frame around it just to hold it to the tight to the back of the hood, and that will keep all the dust from spewing out the back. So let me spin it around and I'll show you how that works. So nothing fancy here, just cut a piece of tarp, put it against the back, and then use these 4 pieces of plywood to hold it tight. And that seems to work great. If I need to, if dust tends to collect down here at the bottom, I can just pop this piece off, let it drop out, and then put this back on. So real simple, not too complicated there. And then on the side here, you might be wondering what the heck this is. Well, I have this, the cord for the saw kept up and away, because when I'm moving this around, what always tends to happen is the extension cord gets caught underneath the caster of the cart, and it always goes and just like comes to a stop. So by holding this cord up and away, it tends to prevent that from happening. Plus, it's a little high, so it's not going to hit me in the face when I walk too close to it. So, and then I also have a little bit of room, so if I want to like knot this with the cord so that they don't come apart, I've got a little bit of extra cord to do that. So before I finish up this video, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Home Depot and I'm going to get a piece of hose that I can connect to the dust port on the back of this and route that hose down through the side and hook it up to a shop vac. And then I'm going to make a number of cuts on here and just see how the dust collection works. This floor is pretty clean in here, so I'm willing to sacrifice it and see what happens. So we'll see how well this new dust collection hood actually performs. Turns out I didn't have to go to the Home Depot. I actually had a piece of shop vac hose laying around. In fact, it was the old hose from that shop vac there. Had a few holes in it, but I was able to wrap some duct tape around it, and it's just the right length to hook up to the saw here. So what I've done is I've hooked up one side to, I guess, the out of the dust port for the saw, and then cut a hole in the back near the top and ported it out the back. And then I had a adapter laying around which allows me to adapt to different size hoses. So I stuck that on there, and then I got the hose from this vac and just put that right in there. So that fits pretty well. And to give this a fighting chance to work, I took this outside and cleaned the filter for this shop vac so that it's pulling in a lot of air. And I tested it just putting my hand by the dust collection port here of the saw, and I could definitely feel the suction from the vacuum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the vacuum on, and I'm going to make 10 cuts of a 2x4 and see how much dust really gets put in the back of the dust collection hood, how much it actually travels out to the front, if any gets on the floor, and how much is actually sucked into the vacuum. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and we'll see the results. Before I do that, I'm going to bring the camera in. I'll show you that this is pretty nice and clean right now, and then afterwards I'll show you what has collected in the dust hood. You can see it's pretty clean in there right now. Really no dust whatsoever. I gave it a good vacuuming. Not much on the front or on the side wings. Here, it's all pretty clean. Same for the floor. A few stains on the floor, but no sawdust. So we'll see how that turns out after I cut the 2x4 with 10 cuts through it. Alright, so here is the saw, and there is a fair amount of sawdust down in the back there on both sides, and here as well. There's some sawdust on the back of the saw, a little bit on the front here, and just a little bit of sawdust there and here, but almost nothing on the floor. Maybe just a few little bits on the front, maybe just a little bit on the side. But other than that, it seems to have contained 95% of the dust within the dust hood itself. So let's have a look inside the vacuum. Not a whole lot in there, but definitely some sawdust, new sawdust has gone in there from when I cleaned it out this morning. Seems about right. So now I'm going to time, using my phone, how long it takes me to clean up the sawdust from the miter saw here, and get an idea of what it takes to clean up each time after using the saw. Almost 2 minutes, 9 seconds. Not too bad for cleanup time. Well, that's going to wrap it up for episode 14 of Fun with Robotics. As always, if you have any questions about this week's build, send an email to info@theroboticscodedepot.com, and also check out the website, theroboticscodedepot.com, because there's always new information being posted there. and I will see you next week.